The name of today's presentation is called The Final Nail in the Coffin, the Demographics of Haiti and the Dominican Republic Explained. The source of this video is from Dominican and Haitian Animosity in Today's Society, Historical Facts and Racism by Educated Traveler. And the video clip of this presentation is based on a short video segment that Alex from Quisqueya Life did. I already did a full commentary on it, but I've created this presentation so I can make things as clear and concise as possible. So this is the introduction. It is more accurate to state that it is an ethnic conflict rooted in social and economic implications. The two respective nations have entirely different demographic origins, forever setting the two nations apart, one having a complex social and economic problem on top of a humanitarian/migrant crisis. In regards to the relationship between the Haitian people and the Dominican people, it is very hard to generalize because our histories are complex. In my opinion, generalization hurts both sides because important details are always left out. In other words, it is not a black or white thing or nuance. Implications being both sides had different developments and influences that dictate the present, as well as external factors adding to the development of the current conditions, including corruption on both ends. While at the same time, it is also very important to note both nations do not have the same colonial past. When the scales are neglected and understanding of the conflict remains obscure. So here's the problem when reviewing the demographics between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Often at times, the history is either the histories of the two is either romanticized or they focus just on one part of the history as it relates to dictators and not explaining how things had turned up or how did the conditions get up to that point. So the whole purpose of this is to give some clarity while at the same time using this video clip that Alex made from Quisqueya Life that was featured on Educated Traveler. And hopefully when we reach the end of this presentation, you will have a little more clarity and understanding. And at the same time, you will have the PDF to download, which you can find on the community tab on the Confederation of the Antilles YouTube page. There's a demographic reality. History is not black and white, it's multifaceted. The conflict between the Haitian and Dominican ethnic groups are the result of different social and cultural experiences, which produces confrontations. It is important to understand these differences in demographics between the two peoples as we have different founding populations. 1. What happened in Saint Domingue did not happen in Santo Domingo. And the people of Haiti and the people of the Dominican Republic, the Dominican people, they did not come up together as a society together in comparison to whites and blacks in the United States. This is very important to repeat because whenever an outsider looks at this, especially looking in social media, whether it be YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, when they see what's happening, They'll compare it to the history between blacks and whites in the United States not having a full understanding. And on top of the constant revisionisms and rhetoric, it doesn't make anything more clear. So in Santo Domingo, one factor, because Santo Domingo was abandoned by Spain for 3 centuries, Santo Domingo evolved to cattle ranching, meat, and contraband. While on the opposite end, Saint Domingue evolved into an export economy that was solely founded on slave labor. Now, when you look in Santo Domingo didn't have this, as slavery was practically non-existent. So the evolution on the island of Hispaniola post 1492. Two colonies, two entirely different demographic histories. The history begins with the Spanish colonial period in 1492, where the Spanish and African people they brought together admixed with the native population on the island of Hispaniola, giving rise to the Dominican people. By the end of the 16th century, Spain would abandon the Spanish colony for 3 centuries. This isolation will create the conditions for the Dominican people to emerge as an ethnic group on the island. Dominicans today are 75% a racial mix of Europeans, Africans, and Taínos that have been evolving for 500 years and more than 30 generations that you do not find in other islands or territories. In 1625, the island's history is split into two with the arrival of the French. The French established a colony on Tortuga Island. In 1641, French buccaneers established settlements in northwestern Hispaniola. In 1642, King Louis XIII authorizes the slave trade for the French colonies. During the 17th century, France regulates the slave trade for its colonies. The islands in context became competition between the Spanish, English, Dutch, and French powers. The French colonial empire in the Caribbean combines the large islands of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint-Domingue to the small islands of Grenada, St. Lucia, etc., providing for the French a landscape for shaping the French plantation economy. Between 1681 and 1791, African laborers were imported by the French, with most imported by the French during the latter part of the 18th century after the Treaty of Ryswick. The African-born slaves in Saint-Domingue lacked island roots when the state of Haiti was founded by January 1st, 1804. For this reason, the people of Haiti have very little connection to the island and its remote past. Now, this statement has nothing to do with racism. It deals with the simple fact that the enslaved people of African descent that was imported by the French, they had a high mortality rate. And with this high mortality rate, the French kept importing slaves. And this is why by 1791 in Saint-Domingue there was 500,000 of slaves in the former French colony of Saint-Domingue, which today is now the Republic of Haiti. So let's review these differences. Let's start with Santo Domingo. Santo Domingo had a caste system that was not really founded. It wasn't based on preventing races from mixing, but on establishing a hierarchy based on power. We had the peninsular class, the class that was actually from Spain. The Creole class, Europeans born on the island, and the mestizo class, mixed European and indigenous, and the mulatto class, mixed European and African. The Sambo class, the Indian and African class being the lowest. The mixing and relaxed racial attitudes was a factor. The abandoning of Santo Domingo was also a factor. The European depopulation played a role, as well as in the demographic formation of the Spanish part of the island. Now, let's look into Saint-Domingue. During the French colonization of the island, Saint-Domingue was populated by three classes of inhabitants, divided by the color of their skin. During this period, Saint-Domingue was populated by French white men and a few enslaved mulattoes that were killed or expelled when Haiti was established in 1804. During this period, when the Western Third was a French colony, white settlers were at the top, 2 mulattoes and free blacks in the middle, and 3 enslaved people of African descent who outnumbered the other races in the French colony by a ratio of 10-1. Enslaved people of African descent were governed by the Code Nero, or the Black Code, which was signed by King Louis XIV in 1865. Okay, and King Louis XIV was followed. He succeeded his father, King Louis XIII. The Black Code was a set of laws that governed the practice of slavery in the French colonies. The Black Codes can be compared to Jim Crow in the U.S., in my opinion. So this is an important note that I want to point out. Santo Domingo never had Black Codes or Jim Crow laws, and never had sugarcane fields or plantations that occupied massively enslaved African people. Sugar plantations disappeared by 1580. Economy based on slavery was not established, as the population was too poor to own slaves. No such laws ever existed in Santo Domingo that conditioned the relationship between the white Europeans, Taino, and African slaves brought by the Spanish in the early 1500s to the island. Now keep in mind, these sugarcane fields, right, as they ceased by 1580, they would not return until the end of the 19th century. And we will explain this towards the end of this presentation. The Dominican people. The Dominican people existed as an ethnic group before the Dominican state in 1844. In the early 1600s, before the French occupation of the western third of Hispaniola, we as a people were thanked by the King of Spain for fighting off the Dutch pirates, and there is a special letter written in 1625 dedicated to the Dominicans, preserved in the museum in Seville in Spain. So this letter is important because the ethnic identity of the Dominican people was formulated before the Dominican state. Now let's go into the French pirates. It wasn't until after the Osorio devastations, which was between 1605 through 1606, where King Felipe of Spain ordered the governor of Hispaniola, who at the time was Antonio Osorio, to depopulate the western part of the island and to move the Spanish inhabitants to the nearby parts of Santo Domingo as a way to control the smuggling developed on the north and northwest coast of the island. This application, the application of this order was used by the French to begin occupying the western part of Hispaniola, as it was fairly left unpopulated by the Spanish. The French would begin to settle on the western third beginning in 1625, a period that would split the island's demographic history into two. Now, please consider in mind that during this period in 1625, the people of Haiti were not yet on the island, as they were not imported by the French as of yet. On the island of Hispaniola, there was a small minority of whites, largely due to the mass depopulation events that occurred. Many Europeans left in search of riches in Mexico and other places when Spain abandoned Santo Domingo. Many also left the island after the 1805 Mocha massacre and the invasions of 1822. During these events, Dominicans sought refuge in Cuba and also Puerto Rico. This is why we always had a smaller population density as compared to other Latin American countries. The colonization of the Cibao Valley between 1494 and 1509, it was the population that remained in the island until now, giving Dominicans its cultures and traditions while representing 80% of the inhabitants for the last 500 years. The Dominican Republic of the Interior evolved differently than the thinly populated coastal areas of the country and the island in the last 450 years. From 1625 onwards, there were two colonies on the island of Hispaniola. The first being fundamentally Spanish and having a Hispanic culture that evolved on the island and was unique. The second was fundamentally French. France began an exploitative sugar economy. No, Santo Domingo did not have an exploitative sugar economy and never has. The French began this practice towards the middle of the 17th century and gradually continued this practice of importing enslaved African people, beginning with the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697. And this occurred throughout the 18th century, which this importation by the French ending in 1791. This is why the colonial past of the Haitian people is zero. As I mentioned before, enslaved people imported by the French, they had a high mortality rate. Before 1804, while the colonial past of the Dominicans at 1804 and before 1844 goes all the way back to 1492. And this is matched up by the genetics. You see the difference. And the main difference is the Dominican people inheriting the genetics of the Tainos. It's minuscule, but the reason why it is so important is that it differentiates our population history from the population history of the Haitian people. The reason: Spain brought a few slaves from 1503 to Santo Domingo, and that importation of slaves ceased by 1540, when the Castilian viceroyalty had already closed in 1535 in Santo Domingo, and the island began to be abandoned by the Spanish to go to Cuba, Mexico, and also Peru. Slavery in Santo Domingo was practically non-existent. There is a term called cotación, meaning limitation or restriction. Carol Lawrence explains that there was a condition of limited slavery in Santo Domingo. Slaves in this condition were to be freed if they observed certain terms of agreement, such as paying an amount to their masters. With 3 or 4 slaves, one could manage a ranch where thousands of head cattle were raised on more than 1,000 acres of land, as Santo Domingo had a larger population of free people of color than San Domingue. And this is a fact. Let's keep in mind, in Santo Domingo, there's no documentation of brutal slave conditions, whereas in San Domingue, there is tons of evidence by the French of brutal slave conditions. And this is documented. If you look in the references of this presentation, the 2011 report explains it very thoroughly. Free mixed people of color. In 1769, Santo Domingo had 30,862 free people of color. In 1753, in San Domingue, had 4,732 free people of color. The treatment of slaves in San Domingue. In a report that I just referenced, the key dates of slavery practiced by France, the daily life of the slaves on the French habitation in the French Saint Domingue in the 18th century, it explains how brutal French slavery was in Saint Domingue. The anti-French sentiment the Haitian people developed, which would reflect the anti-foreign sentiment in the future. Let me say this again, because this is very important to understand the current political landscape in Haiti. The anti-French sentiment the Haitian people developed, which would reflect the anti-foreign sentiment in the future, was the result of the brutality by the French and the treatment of enslaved people of African descent in Saint Domingue. This resulted in the massacre of the French white settlers on the island, with the remaining fleeing into Santo Domingo, thus leading to the Haitians following pursuit, leading to the massacre of Spaniards, mixed people, and the French in Santo Domingo in 1805. This event is remembered today as the Massacre of Mocha. During this time, Santo Domingo was under control of the French under the Treaty of Basel. The Haitian Revolution was a series of revolts from 1791, which started with Dottie Boukman, who was a Jamaican in Saint Domingue, and it ended in 1804 when the Haitian people achieved their independence from the French. So in this part where Alex says in the video clip, 17 years after the Dominican Republic declared their independence from Haiti, Haiti sent reinforcements to the Dominican Republic to help Dominicans to fight in their war against Spain. This is entirely incorrect. Now let's review why. Initially, Haiti under Fabre Geffrard tried to provide help and support for the restorers, such as providing weapons. Under Geffrard, the people of Haiti did nothing more than to give their territory to start the war. However, Spain threatened the Haitian people to stop any help to the restorers, and Haiti complied. How do we know this is true? It took place in June 12, 1861, when the Spanish government gave instructions to Joaquin Gutierrez de Rubalcaba to carry out a punitive against Puerto Rico, writes Jean Price Mars. The order was then carried out on July 6, 1861, as a fleet under Rubalcaba anchored in the harbor of Port-au-Prince and threatened to bombard the city. After this ordeal, Geffrard was forced to observe a neutrality. Sanchez was shocked to learn the Haitian people abandoned the support and made his way back to Haiti. Even Jose Maria Cabral didn't see it coming either, thus immediately went back to Haiti to strategize. The letter from Spain told the Haitian people not to provide support for the East. Haiti thought Spain would invade Haiti and reestablish slavery, but there is no evidence Spain has such intentions. As we all know, Haiti did not recognize Dominican independence until 1876. So we're going to review two things. The evolution of the border, and then the 1812 Constitution of Cadiz. Right? These are two very important points. In the 1697 Treaty of Ryswick, Spain recognizes the French presence on the western coast of the island instead of ceding the entire island to France. In the 1776 Treaty of Atalaya and the 1777 Treaty of Aranjuez, Spain fixes the border between its territory and the French territory on the island. In this process, Spain guarantees that most of the island remains as a Spanish territory. In the 1795 Treaty of Basel, Spain ceded the Spanish part of the island of Santo Domingo to France. This decision came about from Napoleon Bonaparte invading the Catalonia region of northwestern Spain. Afterwards, the French proposed that they would return to Catalonia if Spain cedes its part of the island of Santo Domingo. In essence, Spain was placed between a wall and a spade. After the success of the 1809 War of Reconquest, when the Dominicans put an end to French rule on their part of the island, Spain reincorporates its former territory without any obstacles. The Spanish Constitution of 1812, Spain's first constitution, explicitly states that the Spanish part of the island of Santo Domingo was an integral part of the Kingdom of Spain. It is important to note that despite France losing the War of Reconquest in 1809, it continued to claim Spanish Santo Domingo as its own until the 1814 Treaty of Paris. Right, as the Treaty of Paris is signed between Spain and France. Spain, in essence, was anxious to reclaim its territory to the degree that it placed in its own constitution 2 years before it was internationally official. So just keep in mind, just to keep it very simple, Saint-Domingue, a French colony, and Santo Domingo, a Spanish colony, both were colonies under France and also Spain. The people, the Dominican people, were an amalgamation of people from the early contact period, right? The Spanish and the African people that they brought with them, mixing with the Spanish, right? Those conditions in the island at the time, in the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo, gave unique conditions for the Dominican people to emerge on the island as an ethnic group. While on the French colony, the French importing enslaved people of African descent and the brutal conditions that enslaved African people went through in the French colony, those conditions made the Haitian people evolve and emerge on the French part on the island as an ethnic group. Now, both at the time didn't have control of the colonies because it was either between the French and Spanish powers. But again, both having different contexts in how they emerge as a people on the island. So let's look over the Constitution of Cadiz of 1812. It says of the Spaniards, Spaniards are all free men born and living in the domains of Spain and their sons. And when you look at part 10 where it says of the territories of Spain, it mentions Santo Domingo, right? Well, once again, it says all Spaniards are, and we got to look beyond. This is not about color. This is about an ethnicity, right? All free men born and living in the domains of Spain and their sons. So all free people on the island of Santo Domingo, right, on the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo, right, all free men born were observed as Spaniards, okay? So just keeping it in simple terms, all free men born on the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo, right, they were observed as Spanish people, okay, in terms of ethnicity, not color. Color does not define ethnicity. The 22-year occupation of Santo Domingo by Haiti. What transpired evolved into an occupation. The occupation of Santo Domingo by Haiti can be classified as an annexation or a failed unification. Why a failed unification? The reason for this is when you look at the period of 1822 to 1844, the occupation was a forced one. Even Frank Moya Bones says that both were dissimilar. So the people of Haiti try to force their ways onto the people in the Spanish colony when they already had, the people in the Spanish colony had their own ways of doing commerce. And the ways of commerce that Haiti was at the time didn't work or wasn't compatible. So when they tried to force changes to build an economy, what happened was a clash. And it led into the island coming into debt. And as the island went deep into debt, for the reasons that we're going to summarize, the Dominican people decided to separate from Haiti. And this is why we have two historical manifestos that explains the separation from Haiti. And I always mention this for the reason being, and this is the reason, because people today, they look at it, oh, the Dominican people separated from Haiti is racist. No, it has nothing to do with racist or racism for the latter. When you look at the two historical manifestos, the separation from Haiti was clearly concerning social and economic reasons. Has nothing to do with race. We have to throw that out the window. So I'm going to read this again. What transpired evolved into an occupation. The occupation of Santo Domingo by Haiti can be classified as an annexation or a failed unification. Another factor was a lack of a collective consciousness. There was a split in what was the better course of action to be taken. And one of the reasons why there was a lack of collective consciousness was the historical depopulation events. Some perceived annexation to Haiti to be the better route, while others perceived joining the Grand Columbia. There were many factors leading to the occupation. One, low population density. Two, lack of a stable treasury and navy. And three, not to mention Bolivar's relationship with Haiti. Dominicans sought security and desired the best route where those rights could be secured, seeing why there was such a split in Dominican consciousness. There was never any constructive interactions between the two sides. Haitian officials then and now lacked organization and direction. Many Dominicans do not want to be burdened with the failure and mismanagement. On the Haitian side, everything was forced, whether military invasions or forced neo-slavery to revive the French plantations. The problem was being out of touch with the Dominican land tenure and private ownership, so in reality, they went with what didn't work. And that's why the unification with Haiti failed historically. The Teneros Comuneros had been around since the 16th century. For the Haitian people, it seemed confusing and backwards. Dominicans with titles to large properties would find their properties fragmented and shared with others. Many of the large landowners were in debt because of the decline of the livestock market. So I just want to mention this. So when it comes to the plantation economy, there were several people that tried to revive it. First by Louverture, then Dessalines, followed by Christophe, and last by Boyer. In all of those attempts, all of these historical Haitian figures, the revival of the plantation economy, it didn't work. Why? Because the Haitian people did not want to go through the brutality that the French put them through. So it wasn't a feasible way to move forward to rebuild the economy for the people of Haiti. So we have to understand why the economy for the Dominican people was different. And during the colonial period, right, when you look at Frank Moyer-Bourne's book, The Dominican Republic, he explains this. For Dominicans, because of the assurance of a foreign market, cutting mahogany in the south, planting tobacco in the north, and raising cattle in the east was more profitable than plantation agriculture. France would come back. Under Boyer, Haiti under Boyer were concerned of an external threat on top of the fear of the French reinstating slavery. France attempting to retake their former colonial possession. Annexation to Haiti. Boyer invaded to unify the island to protect against an external threat. Now, a lot of people also mention, well, Haiti abolished slavery in Santo Domingo. There's not really much evidence for that because, again, Slavery was non-existent in Santo Domingo. And when you look in the presentation here for yourself, you see why. Haiti had a larger army and population than Santo Domingo. For this reason, Jose Nunez de Cáceres reluctantly handed over Santo Domingo to Boyer on February 9, 1822, when presented the keys of the city of Santo Domingo. Boyer intended to unify the island to protect against an external threat. The unification failed due to a number of reasons that are summarized into two historical manifestos. The first was written January 1st, and the second January 16, 1844, both explaining the reasonings and basis for the separation from Haiti, which are what evolved into a forced military occupation, expropriation of all communal lands, policy of forced labor to raise money for the French indemnity, taxation, and bringing the entire island into debt. Haiti had already enacted several policies to revive the plantation economy in the former French colony under Toussaint Christophe, and lastly under Boyer. Here I forgot to put Dessalines' name. Dessalines was also another person that attempted to reinvigorate the plantation economy. All attempts to revive the French plantation economy, failed. For all of this, there was a mutual desire to preserve Hispanic culture that evolved on the island and to separate from Haiti in 1844. Now this goes into the next important point. There is no evidence whatsoever that Juan Pablo Duarte was ever a white supremacist. Why is this? When you compare Duarte to other Caribbean Hispanics of the 19th century, Duarte clearly expression of human values, love for the country for which he inhabited, the spirit of Latin American independence, and he was a strong advocate for anti-imperialism. So when you compare Duarte with other Caribbean Hispanics of the 19th century, they all expressed the same ideas. And none of them had polarizing racial views. So what motivated Duarte? One, seeing his father, a merchant who had been impoverished, the result of what evolved into an occupation. Two, inspired by various movements of the time while studying abroad. And three, the third reason that motivated Duarte was a desire for independence. So let's go back to this part. What led to the annexation to Spain in 1861? One, economic crisis. The raise of the exchange rate of the Dominican peso and the printing of paper money, with the monetary problems threatening the security of the country. The fear of an enemy invasion and aggression, and fear of a U.S. invasion. The country left in ruins due to war. The Dominican economy was in ruins after the Restoration War, as the Restoration War had left the country devastated. We're going to see why, after the Restoration War, how badly that it affected the Dominican Republic. But first, this is an important thing that I want to review. The summary of anti-Haitian sentiment, it can be understood when reviewing the following. In the 1801 invasion from Saint-Domingue, Louverture invaded Santo Domingo in the name of France. but had no permission from France to invade. The first of many invasions into the Dominican territory, of many that were made during the 19th century. The 1805 Mocha Massacre, 1808 through 1809 War of Reconquest to retake the Spanish Santo Domingo from France, the 22-year military occupation, Haitian aggression and invasion attempts from 1844 through 1856. The governments after the Restoration War unable to create a secure border control. A total of 6,200 kilometers of land ceded to Haiti due to border conflicts. Present today, migrant crisis slash passive invasion. Disrespect of the national sovereignty of Dominicans. A desire of not wanting to assume responsibility for Haiti's social and economic problems. Modern crimes against the Dominican people. The anti-Haitianism has been around since the time of the occupation in the 1820s, but it really took shape under Trujillo. Haitians were welcome to an extent up until the border issues popped up again at the end of the U.S. occupation of the island. There were good relations between the two nations until the borders kept being violated by the people of Haiti. There was a lot of anti-Haitianism sentiment because of the border issues and more Haitians occupying Dominican lands near the border. The same issues the Dominican Republic has now. So let's summarize the social and economic problems of Haiti. Here are the factors. Corruption. The second, mismanagement. The third, self-isolation. And this self-isolation hindered the economic development. Destroying the wealth and means for production entirely. And last, massacre of the white residents in Saint-Domingue. So normally, whenever anyone hears of the conditions, right, they mention the external reasons. Now, the external reasons are not the cause, they're the effects, they are the response, such as the historical embargoes, the indemnity, and the interventions. Those are a response to the political instability. And without knowledge of the two together, no one will understand that Haiti's social and economic problems is a complex issue. What led to the migrant crisis slash problem in the Dominican Republic? To understand how the migrant problem or influx of Haitians began in the Dominican Republic, we have to start with after the Restoration War. It all happened after the Restoration War in 1865. The Dominican consciousness was more fragmented due to the Haitian aggression and conflicts with Haiti and the various depopulation events. The country remained dominated by several dozen caudillos. Moyapon's writes, Dominican politics had always been based on personalism rooted through a system of personal connections. So this goes back in the beginning where I mentioned of the hierarchies in Santo Domingo was based solely on power. In the following years, Moyapon's writes the conflicts between the Rojos or the Azules, or between the North and the South, engulfed the Dominican Republic into more than 50 uprisings and revolts, resulting in some 21 changes in government. It began with Buenaventura Baez and was further exacerbated by Ulysses Hero. The result of this was the Dominican Republic plunged into debt, eventually setting the conditions of U.S. involvement in Dominican affairs and the importation of Haitian workers by American companies into the Dominican Republic beginning in the early 20th century. Baez negotiated the Hartmont loan in 1869. Baez was desperate to win U.S. support and to sell Samaná to the United States. He sought to obtain a loan first in the U.S. This failed, resulting Baez to get his loan in Europe. This practice was continued by Hero when he contracted the Western Drop loan in Europe in 1888. Hero borrowed heavily also from tobacco merchants in the Dominican Republic and sought more loans. After Hero's death in 1899, the Dominican Republic was continually threatened by various European powers that insisted in collecting the debts the Dominican Republic owed to European bond holders. Now, when this happened, the U.S. wanted to eliminate Latin American countries from getting loans in Europe. And U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt viewed these threats as unacceptable for the risk they posed to the Panama Canal's defense. Roosevelt wanted to remove the Dominican Republic as well as other Caribbean countries from the sphere of European influence and force the Caribbean and Central American governments to no longer contract loans in Europe. In 1906, it was the interest of the U.S. to eliminate once and for all European interference in the Dominican Republic and to replace this influence with U.S. financial protectorate as established in the 1905 agreement. The Dominican government was to surrender the administration and control of its customs to the U.S. until the debt was paid, and also promised not to modify its tariffs nor increase its public debt without that of the previous consent of the President of the United States. There was not many ways to escape from the bankruptcy inherited by both Baez and further complicated by Hero. And by the way, this is summarized from the recent blogs that I put on the Confederation of the Antilles WordPress, which you can find by clicking on the community tab. Sugarcane was introduced to the island of Hispaniola in the early 1500s by the Spanish colonists. This practice would soon change for cattle ranching, tobacco growing, meat, and contraband when the colony of Santo Domingo was abandoned by Spain for 3 centuries and would not return towards the end of the 19th century with Cuban sugar planters following the 10 Years' War. Disruption in global production caused by the 10 Years' War, 1868 through 1878, the American Civil War, 1861 through 1865, and the Franco-German War of 1878, this allowed the Dominican Republic to become a major sugar exporter. Hero granted Cuban planters large tracts of land in the southeastern coastal plain, where they built the nation's first mechanized sugar mills. By the last 2 decades of the 19th century, sugar surpassed tobacco in the Dominican Republic. Now keep in mind, in this period, Ulysses Hero, he was doing a lot to try to get more and more money, more than Baez, right? And this led to his assassination in 1899. Now, so when you look at what was happening in the world at the time, This is why, in the beginning of the 20th century, that the Dominican Republic became a major sugar exporter. So, this is why, again, you have to, this is why the history, the demographic histories between Haiti and the Dominican Republic cannot be looked at through a black and white lens. Both nations have complex histories and differ greatly. And things happen historically that set things in motion, such as the importation of Haitian people into the Dominican Republic by American companies to work in the sugarcane fields. The Azules attained power in 1879, at the same time that a new industry was beginning to develop in the South as an indirect result of the War of Restoration. This war had cited the Cuban nationalists to launch a similar effort against Spanish colonialism in 1868. Hence, during the next 10 years, the first war of independence was fought on Cuban soil. From the beginning of this war, many Cubans immigrated to the Dominican Republic, so that within a few years, there were some 5,000 Cuban exiles living in the Dominican Republic. These immigrants had important effects on the Dominican Republic. The most important effect of this immigration was the investment made by some Cubans who bought land to establish sugar plantations and modern sugar mills that used steam power and railroads. The construction of these sugar mills began in the South and in the East, where land was less expensive and where the tradition of sugar production was still alive near the capital. The first to establish a modern sugar ignero was a Cuban investor, Joaquin Manuel Delgado, who in 1875 brought 5,000 hectares of near San Carlos and imported new machinery and railroad equipment to process and transport the sugar. From this point on, the number of investments multiplied, so that within 7 years, 30 sugar plantations and engineers were established, representing an impressive investment of 21 million pesos or $6 million, an amount which was several times greater than the national budget. Now, this is an important point. The owners of these mills were all foreigners, because Cubans were followed by the American and then the German and Italian investors who eventually controlled the entire sugar industry. And this is going to be the last slide. Hero completely ignored the Cibao liquidating their assets by constantly demanding new loans through the juntas de credito, resulting in the sugar elite gradually replacing the Cibao merchants who were suffering from low tobacco prices and the loss of the tobacco market. It should be noted that this transition took place in a context in which the Dominican sugar industry came to be controlled mainly by U.S. capital, in a context in which Haiti and the Dominican Republic were under the military of the United States. The different executive orders of the military administration regarding the migration tended to support the demand for labor from American companies. In effect, those decisions were aimed at encouraging Haitian migration to the sugar mills located in the Dominican territory within the framework of what Wilfo Lozano calls the model of an insular labor market. which guaranteed the availability of cheap labor for sugar companies, and at the same time alleviate peasant revolts against the American occupation in Haiti. So I'm going to explain this. This is a very important part. So what happened was the American companies were encouraging, and this, by the way, this all took place during the first U.S. occupation of both Haiti and the Dominican Republic. This took place because the American companies encouraged the Haitian people to come work in the Dominican Republic, and the reason for this was the Haitian people were revolting against the Americans. So to alleviate the revolts, the Americans encouraged the Haitian people to come work in the Dominican sugar economy, and this would be the origin of the migrant crisis in the Dominican Republic. By the 1930s, new employment opportunities in other parts of the Caribbean, oil plants in the Dutch Antilles, for example, put an end to West Indian immigration to the Dominican Republic, opening therefore the era of dependence on the Dominican sugar industry from Haitian labor. During the decade of the 1930s, around 70,000 Haitian workers were expelled from Cuba. They returned to immigrate en masse to the Dominican Republic, since they did not find labor reintegration policies in their country, contributing to the increase in number of Haitian workers in the Dominican Republic. This is very important because whenever the policy massacre is mentioned, whenever the policy massacre is mentioned, they just mention mostly, the Haitians being black and the Dominicans being Spanish, but no one ever explains about the border conflicts, the Haitian people deported en masse from Cuba, right? And also there was another part which will come back to me once I read this in a sec. The U.S. military administration had lifted the recurring constitutional blockade on foreign ownership in Haiti. Right? And the Haitian people fought the U.S. against this because, again, the anti-French sentiment gave rise to the anti-foreign sentiment. In March of 1915, the newspaper Le L'Ovesse, quoted by Gillard, denounced the abandonment of the national land by significant volumes of peasants, calling on the Haitian government to investigate this matter as soon as possible. The next year, the former diplomat Villas Garvis declared in the same paper, sorry I couldn't pronounce the name properly, it is no longer about a simple exodus, but the depopulation of our countryside. According to Morrow, the nationalists denounced a continuous escape from the hand of rural work. As for the Haitian government, although subordinate to the occupying American administration, created an immigration tax, then increased acquisition costs of the passport, and sought to control companies recruiting national workers to the sugar mills of Cuba and the Dominican Republic. In 1928, it went as far as to prohibit immigration, but none of these measures managed to counter immigration. So, in addition to the deterioration of the living conditions of the peasants, The measures adopted to encourage immigration by the military administration were enforced, and the representatives of the sugar mills were installed in various areas of the country. And this would sum up how the migrant problem began in the Dominican Republic. So the three things that gave rise to the Posse Massacre in 1937 that no one talks about in detail. Number one, the border conflicts. Number two, the land ceded to Haiti, which started first under Ulysses Hero illegally, and the second under two different governments of two Dominican presidents. I believe one was Horacio Vasquez and the other was under Trujillo, under the U.S. And then the third part, which factored, was Haitian people deported en masse in the 1930s from Cuba. So I want to wrap it up with this. Right, Jose Nunes de Cáceres, he says, and we will pay special attention to the education of the youth, so neglected until now, because without it, all wishes for public happiness are ineffective. Education, proper order, and perspective is very important. And not only that, to be science literate. I cannot stress that, to be science literate. For Dominicans, our ethnic identity has nothing to do with skin color. Dominicans should be proud of being Hispanic because there's nothing wrong with it. As Dominicans, we have a unique Hispanic culture that reflects our cultural experience. Just like the Haitian people have a unique culture that reflects their experience. So it's important that these two things are differentiated because, again, Haitian people and Dominican people are not the same people. We did not evolve together as a society in comparison to blacks and whites in the States. Obviously, when you look at the island of Hispaniola, there was two colonies, one French, one Spanish. And with these two different demographics emerge on the island, with each having their own unique demographic history. It is important that we educate ourselves, we have a proper perspective, and most importantly, not to romanticize and water down the history, because that's where a lot of misinterpretation comes from. Not to mention romanticizing. We don't need to do that. As long as we make intelligent arguments that are 100% factual, nothing can be said. So again, this is all for today. Like, comment, and share. You can have a copy of this presentation when you download the PDF, which you can find on the community tab. References are also cited. And until the next bill.